Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call the meeting to order. As a reminder, please note that the Audit Committee meeting is being recorded for the convenience of those unable to attend this video conference. Aday, can you please call roll?
Yes. John Madrick,
Present.
Nicola Saldo,
Present.
Russell Buckley for Lindsay Oates,
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Tom Shepard,
Present.
Karina Tavares, Anthony Lopez.
Yeah, I'm substituting for him, Greg Faulkner.
Thank you, Greg. Alan Ong,
Present.
Hey, thank you, Aday. We have a quorum. First order of business is agenda item number 2, noting the minutes of the Audit Committee of BERS held on December 20th, 2021. The minutes have been previously provided to the committee via the SharePoint site. May I have a motion to consider the minutes from the December 20th committee meeting?
So moved, John.
Thanks, Russ. And a second? Anyone? I need a second.
Second, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Please raise your hand if you vote to approve the minutes. I approve.
Aye.
Please raise your hand if you do not approve the minutes. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is item number 3, the election of chair of the Audit Committee of BERS. Can I have a motion to consider?
So moved, John.
Thanks, Russ. And a second?
Tom.
Thanks, Tom. The chair will rotate annually and should have knowledge of changing issues within the public sector, pension administration, enterprise risk management, or ERM, internal controls, and the nature of the internal audit environment, BERS risk profile, and its business priorities. Are there any questions about this? Okay, I don't hear any. Can I have a volunteer to be the audit committee chair?
Can't be you again, huh, John?
I don't know. Can it be me again?
Or Nicholas?
It has to rotate.
It has to rotate. Can it be Nicholas?
No, because Nicholas is an alternate for you.
Okay, that's what I figured.
It can be
See,
Russell
Tom.
again if he.
Tom, I see you got your hand raised.
We can't hear, unfortunately. They think there was the audio cut out there.
Yeah, I'm having technical difficulty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not unmuting. Oh, there we go. It took like a good 30 seconds to unmute. So here's the question I have is, the rotate.
Yeah,
Can't hear anything you're saying, Tom. Nope, got nothing. Can't hear anything.
No.
All right.
Now we
I'm
got
gonna
you.
have to try this a different way.
We can only hear when you're
How
not
about
actually
now?
saying what you want to say. Yeah, I can hear you great.
All right, so I just turned the video off. So now the question I have is, do we have to take if we don't have somebody to step in, right? I'm just wondering.
Did anyone hear the question? Do we have to do what?
I didn't hear it.
Okay.
I guess it's do we have to rotate if we don't have an alternative?
Oh, well,
Did I get it right, Tom?
Yes.
well,
Yeah,
according
yeah.
to the audit committee charter, we have to rotate annually. So it just cannot be the person who was just audit committee chair, but it can be anybody else on the committee.
And it can't be an alternate?
Well, it can. The alternate is an alternate to the trustee, so it's the same as long as it's not an alternate to the current chair, right, Alex?
Basically, the alternate, a committee member and that committee member's alternate should be considered as holding one and the same seat. So it wouldn't be a rotation. So, yeah, basically.
All
this
right.
is-
Well, any of you want to do it? If not, then I'll do it.
I
Tom,
guess you're doing it.
Greg, Alan,
no.
speak now or forever hold your peace.
At least
For
hold it
one
for
peace
a,
for a
for a
year.
couple, for a year anyway.
Okay. I'm gonna acknowledge Russ Buckley and Lindsay Oates as the volunteers. I'd like to thank you. Let's vote. All in favor of Russ Buckley / Lindsay Oates as serving as chair of the audit committee, please raise your hands. I approve.
I
Aye.
approve.
I approve.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Believe I am handing it over to you, Russ.
And then I have a quick question.
Go
Shoot.
ahead.
Is that part of some kind of a law about the rotation, or is this part of our own bylaws internally?
This comes
Audit
from the
committee.
audit. This comes from the audit committee charter, which is voted on by the full board. So the board has the authority to amend that term of the charter.
I
It's
would
just
yeah,
taken
I'm
as a
sorry.
best practice for audit committees.
Yeah. I'm just suggesting maybe we want to take a look at that.
That yes, so the board has the authority to amend the charter. The committee,
Okay.
however, cannot. It would have to be the board.
Okay, no, I get it. I get it.
Russ,
So
do you
Karen,
have
are you-
the script?
Yeah,
okay,
I
so
got it.
Karen- Okay.
Yeah, I just emailed it you a few minutes ago.
Thanks, Karen. Aday, would you like to give your internal audit director's update, agenda item number 5?
So the next agenda item is Sandy's update, number 4.
Pardon me. Sandy, you get to go first.
Not much up. Oh,
Yep, go ahead.
hold on. Sorry about that. I've had microphone issues. You can hear me?
Yep.
So not a lot of update from me. A day in the fiscal ops team has been busy organizing the fiscal 2022 audit with our external auditors. There's been no new external audit announcements. A day, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen any. And our responses to a day's list of conclusions and recommendations continues to be worked on. That's all I would offer.
Thanks, Sandy. Aday, would you like to give your update?
Yes, so today we have Allison LeMay and Isaac Bales from Baker Tilly with us, and they will be presenting the results of the first audit. So I'm going to start going through the presentation now.
Sounds good.
All right, so for today's agenda, I'm going to do a brief overview of the audit committee, core attributes for the benefit of our new audit committee members. So I'll cover the core attributes of an audit committee, responsibilities, best practices, and then I'll touch on the reporting structure of the internal audit function. And then I'll cover the audits that have been completed since the last audit committee meeting. One of them will be the loans audit that you had requested to be put back on this on the agenda for this meeting, Russell. So we'll cover that as well. And then I'll touch on what audits are currently ongoing. For the follow-ups, I had to do a separate presentation for that just because the agenda was kind of running long. So if there are any questions, if you've had a chance to review that presentation and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. those questions. And then finally, I'll present the proposed internal audit plan, which we'll be asking you to approve later on in the meeting. All right, so audit committee overview. So the audit committee is a group of 3 or more trustees that are responsible for overseeing the internal and external audit functions of an organization. So in the case of BERS, the BERS Audit Committee is primarily responsible for overseeing the internal audit functions. And this is because the city also has its audit committee that primarily oversees the external auditors, and the results of the work of the external auditors are usually presented to this Board of Trustees every year at the end of the audit cycle. So as I said, the group, as the audit committee, is authorized by the board to assist in its oversight functions. So oversight functions over the financial reporting of the system, risk management, internal controls, compliance, as well as the internal audit function. So internal controls are actions that are implemented by management to help mitigate risk exposures to an acceptable level. Internal control is a process that provides reasonable assurance that the organization will be able to achieve its objectives for effectiveness and efficiency, compliance with applicable laws and regulations, as well as reliability of financial reporting. So it's really key. It's a really key function for the audit committee to make sure that the internal audit function is assessing internal controls and making sure that they are adequate. Now, although management is responsible for implementing the system of internal controls, the audit committee has to understand and be comfortable with the processes that management has implemented, and also be aware of the top risks that are facing the organization. A lot of this is primarily done through the audit committee's oversight of the internal audit function. Now, speaking of the core attributes of the audit committee, the audit committee should collectively possess a working knowledge of audit, finance, IT, law, governance, risk, and internal control. Now, it's not expected that each audit committee member will be an expert in any of these areas. What's expected is that collectively as a group, the committee has working knowledge of these areas. And then I'm going to move on to responsibilities and duties of the audit committee. So this is just an outline. The first one is oversight of financial statements and the reporting process. Again, in our case, the New York City Audit Committee exercises primary jurisdiction over that oversight responsibility. So fraud, ethics and values, system of risk management and controls, compliance, organizational governance, and the internal audit activity are primary responsibilities of the audit committee as well. And then I also wanted to quickly touch on some best practices for audit committees. The first one is that the audit committee is expected to conduct executive sessions as it deems necessary with the executive officers, the chief financial officer, the internal audit director, general counsel, any member of senior management, or actually any member of the organization that it deems fit. Also, as a best practice, is oversight of the adequacy of the system of internal controls, reviewing any whistleblower complaints or information that comes into the system, reviewing the audit plan and the scope of audits that are included in the plan for the year, ensuring that minutes are prepared for each meeting, essentially ensuring that meetings are conducted in compliance with the open meetings law and Robert's Rule of Order, which is basically referring to what we're doing here, having a quorum, having an agenda, having motions for elections and things like that. Also, another best practice for the audit committee is preparing an annual report to the board of the activities of the audit committee and conducting an annual self-assessment of the effectiveness and efficiency of the audit committee. And finally, on this list is reviewing reports from the internal audit function. There are many more best practices out there, but I just wanted to highlight these key ones. All right, so I wanted to talk about the reporting structure of the internal audit function. To ensure the independence of the internal audit function, the department reports functionally to the audit committee and administratively to the executive office. So when we say functional reporting, we're talking about approving the internal audit charter and the risk assessment, as well as the internal audit plan, receiving communications on the results of internal audit activities, such as audit reports that we're going to get into soon, and confirming the internal audit function's organizational independence. So being independent in audit terms is being able to carry out the functions of the department without bias from any other sides of management. Approving all decisions regarding the performance evaluation, appointment, or removal of the internal audit director, approving the compensation of the internal audit director, as well as inquiring from management and the internal audit director on the potential scope or budgetary limitations. So the audit committee wants to ensure that there are no unfair limitations in scope or limitations in resources that will translate into scope limitations for the internal audit function. And then in terms of administrative reporting, we're talking about just enabling and facilitating day-to-day operations of the internal audit function, human resource administration, timekeeping, internal communication, and things like that. So reporting to the audit committee functionally ensures that the internal audit function remains independent. Sorry, my computer is a little slow. I'm trying to get to the next, okay. All right, so the first audit that we're going to cover today is the employee experience and retention audit. It was reported out on the 27th of January. And I have Allison and Isaac here to cover this audit. I think Isaac is going to start off and talk about the employee retention piece, and then Allison will take it away.
Yeah, and I can just start here with the objectives and the scope here a day, and then kick it over to Isaac. So just from background context, you can see the objectives on there. I'll let you guys read through those. But from a background context, employee retention and experience was identified as a risk in 2019 as part of the audit risk assessment. And kind of a concurrent timeline, 2019, HR had also conducted an employee engagement survey with outside consultants. And they had that survey, those survey results had shown negative results from current employee experience regarding communication, recognition, accountability, professional advancement. So we looked at that, took that into context as we were going through and doing the audit. From a methodology standpoint, we held meetings and conducted interviews with the executive office members, directors, deputy directors, and supervisors, as well as we held staff focus groups that were three staff focus groups where staff could volunteer to come and join and share their experience, as well as a survey that was issued across all of BERS to solicit feedback. And so really the purpose of this was to get perspectives and feedback from all levels within the organization. And then also obviously working with the HR department to get an idea of what they were doing and what actions they've had taken or were underway. I will say that HR had noted that while they had started a number of initiatives, right when they were starting the initiatives, of course, COVID hit, and so their priorities understandably have to shift at that time. And as we go through these audit findings and observations, I'll just note that while a lot of them were directed towards HR, when we think of employee experience or retention, that is there are stakeholders across all levels of the organization. And so that starts with, with Sandy and setting that tone at the top of that executive leadership, down to the directors and supervisors as the employee's primary points of contact, and really pushing that message and pushing that cultural experience. and then the employees side too, right? Of kind of buying into that and communicating up from all aspects. And so we think of HR's role in here as helping to build the structure for things and providing that human capital guidance. But from an actual implementation standpoint, that's going to be something that is BERS wide, that from an initiative push. So I'll say, so we'll jump into and provide feedback on the summary of findings from the interviews and meetings that we held. We also did do a cost benefit analysis looking at the cost of temporary employees versus permanent employees. I'm going to kick this over to Isaac because he was the expert on pulling in all the analysis and running all those numbers.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison. Yeah, so like Allison said, we did a high-level cost-benefit analysis to evaluate the efficacy of hiring and employing temporary employees, meaning those employed by a temporary agency and brought on to BERS, versus provisional or permanent employees of BERS. And we also, our goal was to also determine the estimated average cost of a turnover of one employee. And so, you know, the reason for this and the goal was to try and understand the real cost of employing a temporary employee or a provisional permanent employee and give any sort of recommendations in terms of, you know, when it might be best to use one or the other in a certain situation. And so in order to do that, we looked at a variety of information, including average salary information for permanent provisional employees at BERS from fiscal year 2018, 19, and 20. And we also looked at the fringe benefits cost associated for those fiscal years, as well as the average hourly rate for the temporary employees across that time frame. And in addition to the survey that Allison mentioned, we also sent out a survey to the leadership team with questions centered around identifying, you know, hours that employees and leadership spend onboarding and offboarding employees, assisting temporary employees with tasks that perhaps a permanent employee would not need assistance with. For instance, pulling information, and then also some questions around the average temporary employee employment length. And so, you know, the results of that, we kind of broke it down into a few buckets. The first of which was our quantitative results. You know, our estimated annual cost of a temporary employee, when, you know, it looks to be more cost effective than a permanent provisional employee when you just look at it from an annual basis. However, based on our group discussions and the survey results, it was estimated that temporary employee terms are around 10 months. And so when we factor in that cost of attrition that we determined, they actually ended up being a little more expensive than the lower level permanent provisional employees. And not by much, I will say it was very close. And so that did make things kind of more difficult to definitively say one way or another for certain roles. And that kind of brought us into our next results phase there, which was just qualitative factors that, you know, maybe BERS should consider moving forward. For instance, you know, provisional permanent employees, they do retain that institutional knowledge, being there for years and become more efficient and can add value to the organization, whereas, you know, temporary employees, if they're turning over frequently, they would not. Also, those permanent employees can work more independently as they have access to certain systems that temporary employees do not. But one consideration also to keep in mind is that it is easier from our discussions to terminate that temporary employee for underperformance issues. And so taking all of that into account, it's difficult to say which one is specifically better due to the rather close cost between the two. But we did come up with some scenarios that potentially, you know, it might be good for a temporary employee to fit into, such as a role that has, you know, short onboard or offboarding time to get up to speed and really be operating at full capacity. And also if that role does not need access to some of those sensitive systems, you know, for other employees to pull the information for them, that might be a good fit for a temporary employee. Other possible solutions, we were, you know, throwing out there for recommendations was if BERS has a vacant position, they could potentially fill it with a temporary employee. I believe they've done this previously, but they could possibly do it more. Fill it with a temporary employee and kind of use that as a probationary period for them. Evaluate them before extending that full-time permanent position. And it was also recommended in there that it would probably be beneficial for BERS to develop a standardized evaluation process for reviewing and evaluating a new permanent employee to better utilize the probationary period that they have in there in the beginning. So that's basically what we came up with on the cost benefit analysis. If there's not any questions, feel free to ask them now and I can move forward. Great. Okay, so moving on to the observations and summary descriptions you see on your screen there. So
Isaac, I'm just gonna interrupt you here real quick.
Yeah.
I know that, so we've got high priority and medium priority recommendations here. We're gonna spend more time on those high priority ones and kind of fly past those medium ones. Just because I know they wanted to keep us within a specific time frame, so you guys can continue on for the rest of your agenda. So feel free to ask questions as you go, but that's just wanted to put that out there as my reasoning for providing a high level summary here.
Thanks, Allison. So diving into observation 1, goals and performance management. These, as you can see there on the screen, these are themes that we heard throughout our conversations, as well as in the survey. Employees felt like there was some lack of clarity around goals and how they related to their day-to-day jobs. Maybe a lack of understanding on what the measures of success or performance management pieces. And in the interest of time, I guess I'll move on toward recommendations that we came up with that, potentially create a framework related to the 4 pillars and how that translates into goals for department directors all the way down through the frontline employees. And, like Allison mentioned at the front, management did respond to us in that. And in 2020, it sounded like human resources had defined some goals and feedback measures and an employee feedback cycle that is being rolled out in 3 phases. And I believe right now they may be in phase 2 of 3, and in fiscal year beginning of 2023, that'll roll out to all employees at that point in time. Moving on toward feedback. This came up quite a bit actually in all of our interviews across all levels. A lot of employees felt there was no consistent formal or informal feedback provided at this point, and they largely associated the word feedback with negative instead of either negative or positive. Felt like there was no regular meetings with direct reports to provide any of that performance or even professional and career growth feedback. That can kind of contribute to maybe some people checking out and feeling like the low performers are not held accountable, or even that maybe some of the higher performers are not recognized for their contributions. And so part of our recommendation was coming up with that more consistent feedback cycle, more than just annually, having those regular check-ins in regards to professional development as well as performance feedback, and any ad hoc feedback as needed. And again, it sounds like there is that employee feedback cycle that is sort of in the works moving toward 2023. And Allison, did you want to take 3 and 4?
Sure, absolutely. So number 3 is related to intra-departmental communication. And just the overall observation was that you guys have a very heavy top-down information flow, but there's a lot of uncertainty whether or not that information is getting pushed down to frontline employees. And that had a trickle-down effect that you'll see in some of the lower priority observations of grapevine communication and to departments operating in silos. And this was a little bit outside of the scope of the project for digging in deeper on the communication needs. And so we would definitely recommend adding a deeper review for communications throughout BERS. And I would just say that, we've got a couple questions in the report for kind of how to think through that and how to structure that. But really with the goal that all the employees are receiving the same information and that you're building in channels and a clear communication strategy actually for building out that transparency so that you're not getting grapevine communication and that there isn't kind of a gossip mill going on around in the back end. And I'd say just so management responses to this was that that this is just an organization-wide challenge for you guys. From a leadership development standpoint, just overall, you've got a lot of leadership that are leadership positions who with new employees in there who've been elevated from within the organization. And what our recommendation is to just really build out standardized onboarding for leadership and ongoing leadership training. We've seen that work really well at other organizations where you're building in a cohort so that there is some cohesion there, so that there's just like that natural cooperation between departments. Management did say that they've got a number of different programs, and I should say HR said that there's a number of different programs that they either just implemented in October 2021 or that they're planning to implement in 2022. So that's the list of the high priority recommendations. The next 2 pages here are medium priority recommendations. And I'll fly through these a little quicker. So from a cohesion, silos, and interdepartment communication standpoint, we just really recommend building out some cross-functional teams so that departments are kind of starting to learn and build in automatically into their thinking how what they're doing is going to affect other departments or how they can build better partnerships and work across the departments a little better. That also will lead towards building an appreciation for what all the other departments are doing across BERS. And I understand that management did respond and say that there are cross-functional meetings that are occurring currently. And I would just say for that, then kind of digging in a little bit deeper onto those meetings and kind of figuring out from a structural standpoint, what's meeting your needs, what's not meeting your needs, to make sure that the meetings are facilitating the collaboration that you need and the information sharing that you need. I touched on this really quickly previously or alluded to it, that for number 6, there is a grapevine communication that happens amongst all employees. It does happen right at any organization that there is. It seems to be pretty prevalent though and causing some problems at BERS. And so from a recommendation standpoint, that would really hone in again off of like building out a strategic communication plan for the different avenues that you're communicating things to, the different methods that you're communicating things out, and then also building out communication champions so that you're having information directed from where it needs to go. From number 7, call center stigma, and I would say overall for this, that's just building out, there is a stigma for employees that work at the call center that their work isn't as valued and as the first call and the primary customer service department. And so we're recommending that you build out recognition for this in context of overall for leadership meetings, and then providing some ways to recognize that department, either whether or not that's them meeting their metrics, really great customer service, and expanding that across the full organization so that that's being built out across the organization for showing the appreciation for the value of what the different departments are doing. Flexible work arrangements. This is hot news across all organizations, and we understand that there are limitations based off of politics and what New York City's requirements are. However, we are seeing a very strong trend to organizations allowing remote work and work from home opportunities. And so just from a recruitment retention standpoint, looking into this more for whether or not you're going to provide flexible work arrangements, I think will really help you all with your recruitment and retention efforts. And then from a roles and responsibilities clarity, position of just making sure that from an onboarding standpoint, continuing training, that there is clarity around positions. And this goes, a good way to do this goes back to recommendation 2 that Isaac had said, as far as really providing a feedback loop, performance measurements, and regular manager check-ins. Isaac, you want to hit those last ones?
Yeah, I'll run through these real quick. Start at number 10, accountability. To kind of boil this down, many employees felt like there was a lack of accountability for low performers. And, this can result in a lack of motivation for an individual to perform above and beyond. The recommendation for this went back to that number 2 feedback recommendation. Again, having those consistent check-ins with all employees, but also specifically those lower performers may kind of, give them the jolt that, hey, you are going to be having to have these conversations on a reoccurring basis. And so it may help them in their productivity. And then, moving on toward 11, employee HR relations. It was the general feel was that employees felt like human resources may not be a spot that they felt comfortable, sharing openly. And, whether or not that is true, the consequences may still be the same. Perception can sometimes be individuals' reality. And so as far as that went, we were recommending that potentially HR could do some sort of, we were calling in the report a listening campaign, solicit a feedback from individuals in an anonymous form, such as a survey or Dropbox. And, management did mention, and it is true, it's difficult to address those situations and where there is mistrust if there's a lack of a specific instance that they can, respond to or address. Moving on toward 12, organizational initiatives, rebranding, and maturity level. A lot of employees felt like they were operating largely in, tactical mode, kind of don't really have additional time to accommodate some of the initiatives or training programs that don't directly impact or improve their work. And so recommendations for that, we were recommending for the workload burden piece there, maybe some cross-training plans to help alleviate pressure from those in key positions. Maybe re-looking at some processes to understand where there's some bottlenecks where an individual gets stuck and doesn't feel like they can get away, or maybe there's some form of a gap in technology that the first could leverage the resources to improve that. And then lastly, training and development and advancement and growth, they kind of go hand in hand. As far as the training and development, we were hearing quite a bit about how employees felt like there was a good amount of soft skill training, but there was definitely the opportunity for some additional hard skill and on-the-job duty specific training to help them improve in their jobs. And, same with kind of advancement and growth. Employees felt like sometimes there's not a clear path for them in terms of advancement or professional growth. And when there is growth, some of them mentioned, they feel like it's favoritism. And so recommendations along, to assist with those, recommending kind of a structured training, which management has mentioned they have rolled out some direct learning Imagine stuff in 2021, tool for people to customize and develop their training based on tenure and position. So yeah, I guess if anybody has any questions on any of the subjects we've covered today, please feel free to go ahead and ask away.
Thank you both, Isaac and Allison. Appreciate your time here today. I guess, a lot to take in here, obviously. I'm curious to know, presumably you do a number of these employee experience and retention audits at a number of different firms. Many of the things that were referenced here sound like every single organization I've ever been a part of in my entire life. I guess I'm wondering if you could provide a little bit of context, like how bad is this? There are, I think, 5 of these 14 observations listed as high, or was it 10? 4 high, 10 medium. Okay. Is there one in particular that you didn't find management's response to be particularly adequate? I guess I'm looking for a little bit of context, I suppose.
Sure. So I would say you're right? There's always organizational cultural issues. I'll say we do a lot of these, and so typically you don't bring us in unless there are issues, right? relatively speaking, though, I think that the big thing here was that there's this underlying. It sounds like BERS is in a currently like a cultural shift that is happening, and where you have HR you've got a new relatively new L&D person. HR is trying to roll out a bunch of initiatives here to make improvements. But this is going to be you've got the remediation target dates there. That's starting the cultural shift. That's not going to be the end of it, right? I think that. And we see this other places. It was probably, I would say, it's stronger and more prevalent at BERS, where there was definitely a feeling and a sense of probably like long-term employees, long-term public sector employees, we'll say, right? And with the kind of mentality that goes with that, while you also have some new leadership, some newer employees in there that are looking for more advancement opportunities, more feedback, what we would consider probably a little bit more kind of like the millennial kind of work environments, right? And so there's those two conflicts coming into place here. And pushing, I think, right, with Sandy coming on, also pushing more towards metrics accountability. And it doesn't sound like there's been prior, the accountability measure hasn't necessarily been there. And so that cultural shift is hard for everyone getting over to that. And that's what you guys are working through right now. I don't know if Ade or if it's Sandy, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, so this is really important to understand. So I've been here for 6 years as of January 26th. And there are no people in the leadership team who were in the leadership team when I started. Zero. They're mostly, the leadership team is larger than it was before. I'm doing that to develop them. You know, what we have done over the last 6 years is first implement trackers on every piece of business so we knew what was happening and we could identify that there were no backlogs as reported by the previous leadership team. We've implemented a new computer system, which didn't work out all that well. We got about 60-70% of what we were going for in May 2017, which meant we needed to have a subsequent computer project, which is going to sunset in June, and we will still have more to do. So this organization has gone through a churning, which is substantial. And look, the practical reality is that as a public entity, we've had challenges in hiring, we've had challenges in training, we've had challenges from the pandemic, and we're operating at 85% of our existing headcount capacity. So, always a work in progress, always an attempt to get better, and always, our job is to look for incremental improvement at all levels. But this has been a stressful time for everyone. So, give us another 3 years and look at this again. That's what I would ask.
Yeah, and that is definitely why, I mean, in the report, in the very front and the background information, like we wanted to make very clear of acknowledgement that, HR came on, they were starting to push a lot of things in 2019 and once technology was getting up to speed and everything else, and then the pandemic hit. And very understandably, priorities had to shift, right? And so when we were going through and doing this audit, it was in context of that, acknowledging it, and then also wanting it to be a performance audit where it's like, all right, like, given that all of that, this is where we think that you want to be prioritizing your focuses on as you're getting back on track.
And this is a great base from which to improve. We know what we need to work on, and we'll have the time to work on it. And in 3 years,
yeah,
well, we'll either be better, or trustees can flush me out. I'm willing to take that risk.
If I could jump in, from the labor side, and I know I speak for Nick when I say this, the biggest concern for me of what I've seen in this report is the call center stuff. The biggest complaint that Nick and I get is about, contacting BERS, the call center, and waiting on hold. So everything else, once our members get in touch with somebody at BERS, we don't see many complaints. But the major complaint that we do hear about is the call center and getting emails back, and that's a major concern for me as far as coming from the labor side.
Yeah, from the employer side, I couldn't agree more. I think between the number of emails that I get forwarded to me from my boss, of people pestering our CFO about getting in touch with someone at BERS, yeah, all the time. Any other questions from the board on the employee experience and retention audit for the folks on
Yeah.
tilling? Go ahead,
Yeah,
Tom.
so I listened to this and I am kind of stuck with a question. And, we talk about, performance in terms of high performing versus perhaps low performing employees. And I want to know if, that has been kind of fleshed out. Like, are they low performing because the systems don't work for them? Or are they low performing just based on, like a metric in terms of, like how many sessions or whatever they're supposed to do, right? Because there's a part of me, it just feels like, a lot of the conversation we've had have focused around systems that don't work, right? And I wouldn't want employees that are tasked with providing that service to now be kind of victims of the system that don't work, right? So if there have been issues with, let's say, software at the call center, right? I wouldn't want an employee who is kind of rated as low performing to be rated that way because the software for the phone system isn't working properly. I hope I'm making some sense there.
Yeah.
and I'll say, sorry, go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, let me jump in on that, Tom. So, look, every organization has what someone might call low-performing staff members. If we have them, they're very few. We have some that are frustrated by the changes in the systems. I would have to suggest to you that specifically in the call center, our software and technology is the best available, and we're just short-staffed. I mean, we were short-staffed. We're fully staffed now. If we retain all these employees, I think you'll see significant improvements over time in terms of our responsiveness. It doesn't happen right away. Just because we have all 10 seats filled doesn't mean we can respond immediately, because we have to get these people experienced and worked out, and they have to earn their way into their ability to respond to members' questions. But in 6 to 9 months, we would fully expect significant improvement in their response rates. In terms of other systems around the agency, yes, there are modest to significant operating system challenges remaining. Part of that relates to an extraordinarily, a incomplete May 2017 implementation program, which ended after about 15 or 16 years. Alex can jump in and correct any of that that's incorrect. Our current processes in terms of improving the CPMS system through the Velocity Project will deliver better functionality to both members and staff. That is being implemented in a series of rollouts, which will end in June. I can tell you we will still be hamstrung by significant data corruption in years of data that was managed between the payroll systems in New York City and Prudential Insurance Company, which was the system we replaced in 2017. We will be working on that for the next 10 to 20 years. We do not have access to the data to go back and correct 30 years or 20 years of credited service data for some staff. The payroll systems in New York City don't have the ability to support our efforts to do that. So, it'll be worked out as those cohorts of employees retire and we go back and manually verify some of this credited service data. So, we will not solve all the systems project problems and operations for a number of years. Could be many years. But these are problems that are challenges for all public employee systems. There's nothing unique about us.
Can I jump in for a second? I would just like to assure trustees that we will, of course, take the tools into consideration when evaluating the performance of employees. Just to be completely clear on that point, that of course we understand the circumstances under which the work needs to be performed, and we take that into account when assessing the performance of any employee. I hope that's clear.
It is. Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Alex, for that clarification. I appreciate it.
And I also just wanted to point out that we did have interviews with all the staff or most of the staff, as well as a survey, and we really didn't hear much frustration around the system. We've noted in prior audits that the system is an issue, but that does not appear to be the primary source of frustration for the employees. It was more around things like accountability, their goals, feedback, advancement opportunities, things like that. So I do feel like they are somewhat adjusted to the new system and the issues that come along with it, even though they do obviously need to be resolved, but that was not the primary source of trouble for the employees.
Okay, and I have one last question. I also listened to what you were saying around kind of creating a feedback culture that isn't just kind of negative feedback. I can, just suggest from experience, and I think you've alluded to it in this presentation, that if feedback happens in an ongoing way, so we get away from just this idea of perhaps annual reviews to ongoing feedback, then you may even be able to prevent or help people develop in a way where opportunities for them to do better, can happen. So you may even be able to deal with folks who are low performing if you can understand early what their issue is that makes them low performing. So I did hear that, and I wanted to flag that because I always found that those things do produce better results. Thank you.
Yeah, and for any trustees that are interested, Lydia Amin, our Learning and Development Officer, and Michelle Pyram have launched a McLean-led program to develop management and leadership training for our directors and deputy directors and supervisors. The launch of that actually occurred Monday. What day was it? A day? It was Monday. The days are blending together for me. It was Monday, and this will roll out over the next 90 days, and it's a series of 1 or 2 hour events every week, which will, in an effort to impart just exactly that sense, Tom, just exactly that sense.
Thank you.
I'll throw out there also, right, so the BERS's employee feedback cycle was established in 2020, and then the SMART goal philosophy was established in 2021. So relatively speaking, it's a new program, and it's new for employees also. And so there is a time period of when you're introducing structured feedback at an organization, there is a time period where the trust has to get built up between the supervisors and the employees, and the mentality shift on the employee side, right? Of really realizing, like, no, this is for me. This is for my own growth. This is for coaching. This isn't to get me in trouble or retribution. Like there is right to have that candor between and during those performance reviews. I totally agree with you, Tom, that they should be happening. We usually recommend at least quarterly. And then having some sort of more of like a formal, like informal touch bases at least quarterly, and then like formal like twice a year. But right now, I would say, externally looking in, BERS is in that period where they're building up that trust, and you're building up the program in order to really make it a robust program where employees can take that feedback and take that coaching and learn from it. And the new leadership team too, right, is learning how to progress as leaders too, in providing that. And I would going back to the call center comments too, I would just say everybody knows that hiring and recruitment is really hard right now. We're seeing it across the board in the public sector, really, really hard at those entry level positions. And so, Sandy, it's great to hear that you guys have filled out those positions, because when we last chatted, I know that you guys were short those positions, and we're seeing a lot of organizations having to get creative for providing benefits, looking at increases in classification and compensation, because that's really the entry level positions, and then some of like the professional, really professional positions that are specialized, actually like internal audit and engineers, that organizations are having to get creative about hiring because the market's just really hard right now.
Thank you for those comments and that insight. Appreciate that. Any other questions from the board on the employee experience and retention audit? All right, hearing none, I think we can move on to the next piece of our agenda.
Okay, thank you very much, Allison and Isaac. We don't want to hold you hostage, so feel free to hop off.
Thanks everyone for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Isaac.
All right, so the second audit that we are covering today is the loans process audit that was completed in December of last year. This was previously presented to the audit committee, but at the request of Russell, we didn't have time to really discuss it. And I think, Russell, you hadn't received the material, the audit report, so we're going to cover it today. So the purpose of this audit was to review the processes for administering BERS loan programs. And what we wanted to do was determine compliance with any applicable policies, rules, and regs, and also to determine whether internal controls around the loans processes were present and effectively functioning. So specifically, the audit objectives were to assess loan processing, default distribution procedures, and also to determine if the risks were being mitigated. We also wanted to determine compliance with loan policies and procedures and regulations that apply, and also to identify any process improvement opportunities as we do with every audit. So for the audit scope, we looked at all loan transactions that occurred in the calendar year of 2020. We looked at loans that were issued, loans that were already outstanding, and loans that were defaulted. I'll just talk about our overall conclusion and then go into the individual findings. So overall, as a process, we noted that the loan unit currently had, well, at the time of the audit, they had strong controls in place around processing paper loan applications. So when the member physically hands us a form, the loan unit will conduct a careful review before approving and processing the loans. For online applications, we do know that there was a fraud incident with that method of receiving loan applications, and as a result, a two-factor authentication process was implemented for all online accounts, and BERS has temporarily disabled the ability to initiate loan applications online while a review is currently ongoing. And then for defaulted loans, we identified control weaknesses with the process that could result in inaccuracies in processing loans, distribution, reporting, and could also lead to approving new loans for which members are not eligible. All right, so going into the findings. So for finding number one, this was pertaining to the processing of defaulted loans. We reviewed the 1099 hours for deemed distributions that were issued for tax year 2020. And then we also reviewed a report of all missed payments as of May 31st, 2021. Our goal in reviewing these reports was to determine compliance with the rules and regs, and also with applicable sections of the Internal Revenue Code. We did select a sample of 11 loans for review in this test, and what we found was that we found some defaulted loans that were not placed in default status or were not deemed distributed in a timely manner. We also found instances where the members were not informed of impending default. The rule states that when a member let me backtrack. So a loan is deemed defaulted if there is no payment received in 90 consecutive days, or if the loan is not paid off in a 5-year period. So the rules and regs state that when a loan payment is not received in a 60-day period, a notice of impending default should be sent to the member. So we found instances where these notices were not sent, and also instances where the members were already in default and were not notified. And then we also found instances where defaulted loans were not recalculated or were not recalculated in a timely manner that will allow the members to catch up on their loan repayments. Then we also found that 1099 hours were not issued in a timely manner. In some cases, they're required to be issued for the tax year in which the member defaults. And in some cases, the 1099s were not issued. So I want to note that these issues were rectified during the audit when we pointed them out to the unit, the loan unit. And then in 27% of our sample, we found that participants were issued new loans, even though they were in default on existing loans and were not eligible for those new loans. We did hear from the loan unit that part of the problem that they face when they try to determine the accurate status of a loan is that a lot of their loan transactions are in the cash account. The cash account is a temporary holding account for deductions that are not able to be posted to the member's account. So having so many transactions in the cash account is impacting the accuracy of their reporting, and it's preventing them from being able to proactively identify loans that are going into default. So finding number two pertaining.
Hey, Aday, can we just spend a little bit of time on this one for a second?
Okay.
I have a couple quick questions. So the 1099Rs, they are not issued in a timely manner. This is because they're not being flagged as defaulted, and so they should have been flagged as defaulted, and therefore a 1099R should have been issued.
Yes, correct.
And a lot of this does sound like it's coming back to the cash account, right? The policies
Yes.
and procedures with that in particular, and it's kind of like a trickle-down effect on the loans process.
Yes, the cash account impacts almost all processes across BERS. So these members are making payments, but sometimes they're sitting in the cash account, and it causes the loan status to be off. So they may not be in default, but they look like they're in default in the participant account.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is all, I'm trying to think. This is when operations, right? The cash account and then the loans process. So it's like living within the same, I guess my question is it all living within the same vertical of BERS?
Yes, part of the cash account is handled by QA, quality assurance, but loans is handled by operations.
Okay. I know that we had the October 2021 cash account audit, and I'm looking at the follow-up report now and just seeing the policies and procedures that are meriting updating. You know, some CPMS issues associated with the creation of new tickets. I mean, I feel like since I became a trustee on this system 3 years ago, that the cash account has been a challenge, and that, you know, similar to some of the stuff that you were saying earlier, Sandy, about payroll systems of New York City not necessarily opening their vaults to you to allow you to proactively validate information. You know, this cash account overfloweth with payments and isn't automated, and systems don't necessarily sort through things as cleanly as we might like them to. And these kind of high rating audits within the loan process audit are a result of that, right?
Right.
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct, Russ.
I guess I'm just wondering, I mean, maybe this is for later, but the procedures to address a lot of the root causes within the cash account seem part and parcel to this high rating finding.
And a lot of the problems, so the cash account is almost a victim of the strict rules in CPMS. So some of these contributions are perfectly, well, some of these contributions are fine and able to be processed. But if there is a very slight discrepancy between any information attached to that deduction and what's in CPMS, which necessarily doesn't make it incorrect, CPMS kicks it off into the cash account. So what QA has done is that what they run a batch that relaxes some of those rules and allow, so even though it's a semi-automated process, but it still requires intervention. You know, that may be beneficial for loans to some degree, but some of the other contributions in there, like SCP, are too complicated for a batch to apply.
And to be brutally honest, this is not a high priority. I mean, the reality is there's no financial damage accruing to members or the city of any substantial amount. This is about making sure the books and records reflect the reality of the flows of money, right? It's not that the flows of money are not occurring, right? So just understand that, you know, we prioritize against financial damage, financial opportunity versus administrative accuracy, right? So financial accuracy and financial damage and benefit are the priority. And so we will address these, and they get addressed. But I mean, to be honest, it can't be a high priority if we're at 85% staffing.
Yeah, makes complete sense. You know, the fact that it's only semi-automated means that you have to throw staff time at it.
Yep.
The fact that you have to throw staff time at it means that they're not doing other things. If you don't have staff time to throw at it, then, you know, it's like it's so patently obvious that this is a trickle down symptom of the root cause of just not having systems and structures in place to deal with, you know, the slightest, as you said, the slightest discrepancy that CPMS will kick it to the cash account. So I just know that, like, you know, I'm thinking about the member experience here, and
Yep. Well, largely the members aren't aware
benefit from that. They benefit from this if they get a second loan that they shouldn't be able to get.
Which is unlikely, but you're right.
Sure. Yeah.
Hi,
But
this is
yeah.
Tom. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Tom.
Yeah. So actually, you know, if we talk about benefit versus harm, right? I was thinking about when one of the issues here, for example, is when a 1099 isn't issued to a member on a defaulted loan, right? Because that's when the 1099 is issued, right? The loan goes into default, so then it's treated as income, and then a 1099 gets issued. Am I correct on that?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I would think about harm there if a 1099 isn't issued, right? It was in fact income. The member doesn't report that now new income to the IRS, and then down the line, a 1099 is issued, right? Now that puts a member who got a loan, and I won't get into reasons why a loan may go into default, but it now puts that member in some kind of jeopardy with the IRS. So I understand a lot of what you're saying here in terms about how these things are processed, but I also think about like the potential harm to members if these things are not administratively dealt with properly.
Thanks for that comment, Tom. I appreciate where you're coming from for sure. Ade, you want to keep running through the rest of the findings?
Yes, I will. So finding number 2 pertains to loan application intake and documentation review. So for this test, we reviewed a sample of 40 loan applications that were for loans that were already disbursed. Our goal was to determine if they were properly completed by the members and properly validated by the loan unit during processing. So we were looking for things like, were they properly notarized? Was the loan type that the member requested correctly processed? Was the loan amount the same that was requested? Things like that, signature, EFT information. And in our review, we did find one application that was not properly notarized. Operations did let us know that there was a period of time where they had a temporary change in how applications were being notarized, and that was probably the reason for this one. But in general, we weren't alarmed by this one. It was just one instance out of 40. So for finding number 3, we were looking at supervisor approvals for loans. We wanted to determine if, one, there was appropriate segregation of duties, so one person initiating or processing the loan and another person verifying the loan, and then a third person, usually the supervisor, approving the loan. For this test, we also pulled 40 samples. We did note that there was no evidence of supervisor approvals in 80% of the loans that we tested. We did note that prior to rollout 1 of Velocity, the system was not capturing supervisor approval. So we weren't able to tell if they were approved or weren't approved. But all the loans that we sampled that were disbursed after rollout 1 had proper supervisor approvals.
Nice. That's a promising sign.
All right, so the 4th finding pertains to CPMS loan status being inaccurate. We did allude to this earlier. So we reviewed that report of loans with missed payments, and we pulled 10 samples for testing for this one. So 70% of our sample were incorrectly labeled as defaulted. Some of it was due to deductions being in the cash account, and they weren't, but the loan unit gave us different reasons for why they were incorrectly labeled as defaulted, and they did rectify them during the audit. So we recommended to them that they improve CPMS loan reporting and loan status designation going forward. And then the last one pertains to the treatment of interest and insurance premiums that are applicable to the first payment. So we reviewed 4 loans for this test, and our goal was to determine if the funds were being applied correctly and if the loan obligation was being met. So we found that, and this was only for the first payment of a loan, we found that interest and insurance were being applied towards the principal and not to the loan insurance fund or the loan interest fund. Now, on an individual loan basis, the amount is not material, but then we ran a report of all the loans that had been issued since CPMS, and the amount came out to just over $600,000. we did recommend that they ticket this and report it to the vendors because, currently a lot of the financial reports are not being pulled from CPMS, but when they do become pulled from CPMS, there will be impact to those reports. Are there any questions on any of the audit findings before I move on?
Yeah, this is Tom. So there's what you found, and then there were the recommendations that you made, right?
Correct.
I guess the question I have is, at what point could we expect a future audit to compare, what these same things look like after, changes have been made, compared to like what the results of this finding are, to be able to gauge improvement?
So in the short term, I usually will follow up with the process owners and provide that information to you all in the follow-up report. In terms of having another audit of this process, so because internal audit is still fairly new at BERS, we are at this point trying to cover all the key processes first before we start to repeat audits within the same area. The only audit that's currently being repeated is one that's mandated to be repeated by the Controller's Office. But other than that, we don't have any repeat audits in the plan. Another reason for that is resources for performing the audits as well. So we take all that into account. I mean, I'm going to be presenting the audit plan following this presentation, but I can tell you it's not going to be repeated as of now, unless you all want me to prioritize this, but it's not scheduled for 2023 or 2024. So a repeat will likely happen after that date, unless you want it to happen sooner.
And it's important to note, Tom isn't watching this, but the remediation dates for these recommendations for the loan status accuracy improvement, it's second quarter fiscal year 23. And for the interest insurance premium charge, first payment correction is Q4 fiscal year 24. These are in large part systems changes, which are basically in a list of systems updates that we will be working on for the next few years.
Thank you. And I guess I just asked the question because, again, we want to be able to measure improvement, right? Like, so we're saying where we are now, we're saying where we want to be, and we want to measure the progress along the way. And my understanding is that that's what audits do, right? So I understand, like, we're not necessarily in a place where it's like, okay, let's do another audit now, right? But I would think at some point in the future, even if it's 2-3 years down the line, after the recommendations have had some time to be implemented and get baked into routines, to be able to come back, perform another audit, and then compare it and say, well, in 2021, 2022, this is where we were, and this is where we are now, and see the difference. Yep. So that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, right. I would say that's a second order protection. I think Ade is actually quite disciplined about monitoring and following up on the remediation target dates, and she shares her spreadsheet on this regularly with me and with the leadership team, and we focus on this as we have to. These are long-term projects.
Thanks, Andy.
Yep.
All right, so really quickly, so for ongoing audits, so the first one is payroll procedures. We actually recently concluded this one, and it will be reported at the next audit committee meeting. Call center operations, we are reporting. I think that report should be ready very early next week. Procurement audit is ongoing, and we're currently in field work. And then for the BAM audit, we honestly haven't heard anything in months, so I'm really not sure where that is. So All right, so proposed internal audit plan. So we did the risk assessment in the fall of last year. That was reported to the committee at its last meeting. So today I'm presenting the internal audit plan. We usually do a 3-year rolling internal audit plan. I provided the full audit plan as part of the materials for this meeting, but I just have on the screen the audit plan for this calendar year. So these are the audits that we will be performing. I don't know if you want me to, in the interest of time, do you want me to go over each one or
No,
any
that's fine.
questions?
I think if committee members would like to review this, it's in their packets. There's, what, 15 to 20 rows here. I don't think, in the interest of time, we only have 2 minutes left on the meeting. So if there are any specific questions that committee members have on the proposed internal audit plan that you have for a day, please raise them now if you have any. But I don't think it's necessary to run through each of the 15 line items here.
Right. And you can also reach out to me separately after this meeting. I'll be happy to explain or answer any questions. All right, so that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Aday. Really appreciate it. Do we need to put a motion on the table to approve the 3-year audit plan?
Yes, that's the next item on the agenda, item 6.
Can I have a motion to consider?
Motion to consider, Tom.
Thank you,
Second
Tom.
from
Second
John.
from John. All right, so the 3-year rolling internal audit plan, which was just presented to us by our internal audit director, contains planned assurance and consulting engagements for calendar years 22, 23, and 24. Any material changes to the planned activities and/or resources for the department may result in revisions to the plan. Significant changes will be communicated to the audit committee and senior management by the internal audit director. Unless there are any other questions on the 3-year audit plan, I'd like to move to a vote on this item. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the internal audit plan, please say so now. Aye, Russ.
Hi, John.
Hi, Alan.
Aye, Tom.
Hi, Greg.
Any opposed or abstentions? The motion carries. The next item on the agenda is committee discussion. Does anyone have any further questions or comments before we break? Hearing none, that concludes the agenda for this meeting. The next meeting of the audit committee will be scheduled for the second quarter of 2022, communicated to all committee members and invitees in advance. May I please have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
John, second.
Alan, second.
Thank you, Alan. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye, Russ.
John.
Any opposed or abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. We are adjourned. Appreciate your time today, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Aday.